Restoration Passion, Panzer IV, Ausf Model H, made by Volmag. What are some of the horror stories, the moments that you just, the morale hit rock bottom and you guys sort of might have been all over?
One modification leads to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. So yeah, back in the day when it was just a hull sitting in the rack over there, you know, the engine goes in, and then the engine comes out, and the engine goes in, and you make a bracket, and then the engine goes out, and then you try to figure out where you're going to fit different pieces, and it's just a back and forth process. There seemed to be times when it's like, oh, this is never going to work. Yeah, as the war progressed and they kept upgrading these hulls, they learned that lacing armor together makes a stronger joint.
Why is the jig necessary? Why can't you just start welding? And you can kind of go through how that works. Like, it's almost like half a leaf spring.
Verteilt euch! Feldwebel, übernehmen Sie mit 3 Männern die Flanke. Ich gebe Ihnen Feuerschutz.
Restoration Passion, Panzer IV restoration video. So we are inside the beating heart of PanzerFabrik. We are at an undisclosed location deep underground. When are we going to have this ready for install?
Whew, my grandchildren will probably finish this. No, I don't know. This will probably never become anything. What I find really valuable is pieces like this are worth their weight in gold because they're patterns. You don't have to guess at dimensions. You don't have to guess at thicknesses. You can kind of go into all of these pieces and figure out what the pieces are and what their purpose is and back into the overall design.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, let's get into it and we'll start kind of like a top to bottom and we'll just go through some of the highlights of the restoration. Again, we kind of touched on it last time, but why the Panzer and why the Panzer IV, and what was the start of this build? The very start, the first piece that you bought?
So the start of all of this mess is about 2010. Okay. And I wanted to build a Panzer IV. I built the Panzer II Lukes and a Panzer III. Each build got better and better. And so I was looking for a masterpiece. Okay, and so even though this is super beautiful, this is the first of 2 Panzers that we're working on. And so this is more or less to sort out how a Panzer goes together and to really learn Panzer IV. And then now we've started the second Panzer, which we have here, and we'll be talking about its hull and what its history is and things.
Okay. So talk about build time. You can't just factor in when you start putting pieces together. You got to factor in for a rare piece such as this, the time it takes to find and source, and then the network of people you got to build to get to that. So how long are we talking here? You mentioned 2010. From starting to gather parts, how long it took you to gather enough parts to start, and then what's your kind of time into the build itself? Yeah,
so I started making purchases of parts, ground up, scrap looking pieces like this in around 2010-ish. And so you just start buying and moving forward, not knowing exactly where I'm going, I'm just starting to buy parts. And all of these parts come out of the ground in Eastern Europe, usually. Some come out of Western Europe, some are new old stock, some are ground dug rusty things. So once I did that for a period of years, towards we began construction of this piece. Our first welding sparks were November 3rd, 2019.
So that's nearly 10 years of just gathering parts.
Yeah, yeah.
Jeez.
So you're buying them over there, I'm sourcing them to a location, loading them in containers. Anything that's military has to have ATF approval coming in. I have to get a Form 6, get the approvals, list everything out, customs, the whole 9 yards, get them to the United States, get them here and unload them, sort them out, and then try to figure out which pieces belong to which model tank. Because we talked in the earlier videos, there's multiple versions of the Panzer IV. Since it started the war and ended the war, there was the Panzer IVA, B, C, D, E, and so on up to J, and they all had variations and underwent quite a few changes. So I had to sort the parts and figure out what I had that could make a cohesive, correct tank and have it more or less agree with what I was building.
So what's the green light? Like, where's the start? Like, what was the first part you kind of have to begin with?
Well, the first part was actually this bow piece. It came out of Latvia.
Okay.
And so I bought that, and it came with the driver's visor and the machine gun, portions of the machine gun thing. Mm-hmm. And that was part number one. And so I can say that over the period of time of 10 years, the scarcity of these parts has skyrocketed, and the prices have skyrocketed. So starting to collect pieces now is a different ballgame than it was earlier in 2011, and 2012.
Why do you think that is? Like, we've had 75 years to build these things. Why in the last 10 years? Like,
I have no idea. I think there was some successful pieces put together.
Okay.
For the longest period of time, the only German armor was in governmental museums.
Right.
And some wealthy collectors. Yeah. That was all. You couldn't go out and buy one.
Okay.
So somebody along the line got this bright idea of, hey, I think we could take these pieces and put them back together and make a tank. And so when that was done, then now there's another Panzer that's out in the world.
Right.
And then other people jumped on the bandwagon. People started collecting parts. Now there's other people, pursuing the same goal that I am. Okay.
And then talk about the networking. Like, how do you find these people that can source this stuff? I mean, I would imagine that's a hard thing to do in itself.
Yeah, it's a circle of people. It's an inside community, I guess. People know people, and they know who has what, and you can stay in constant communication with people. And then once you start buying, people know that you're a buyer, and they start offering you parts.
So that speaks of itself. To keep doing this, you have to have a good reputation. Otherwise, people aren't going to work with you.
Reputation is everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you could shiest somebody once.
Yep.
That's it. Then
because
you're done.
you've got the tank community with the chieftains and the Shermans, but then you've got like this big and way up here probably the German armor collecting guys.
The German armor collecting is a very, very small community, very specific. Everybody knows everybody. Yeah. Everybody knows of everybody. And what your word has got to be your bond, basically.
Okay. Right now I'm sitting inside the hull of the second Panzer, and this looks like a parts kit. Like, it's in a jig and you put it together, and like something you found on eBay, 80% complete parts kit.
Yeah,
right?
That's about what this hull was about an 80%. It was quite damaged. It was blown out. The story on this hull was it survived World War II. It's a very, very late, one of the last production J model Panzer IVs.
Wow.
Super late. There's characteristics that I could go into for a long time, but it's definitely like a super late production. So this particular tank survived World War II, and I heard it was used, the story, as I acquired it, it was used in a tank training school to train drivers post-war. Oh. And they ran this tank at post-war until the tracks fell off of it. Then it was moved to a target range, and it was shot to pieces. And then it bounced around from collector to collector to collector. I have a photo of it in Riga, Latvia. So at one point, this hull was in Riga, Latvia, stacked with some other hulls. I could tell that by the shape of some of the brakes and things, you can match them, and it's the tank. So somehow it comes back to Germany, and I bought it from a collector that it was physically in Germany, and it was owned by others, I won't say. But so anyway, I was very fortunate to buy enough of a hull that it can be called a hull. And so at that point, I had continued to buy parts, and it started to become clear that basically I had two tanks. I have a very, very late war tank, and then I have the H tank.
Yeah.
And there's enough characteristic difference on the parts that you start two piles and you say, okay, this piece goes to this tank and this piece goes to this tank. So this tank I had less of, and I was waiting, sourcing different parts, some of the suspension items and some of the other more complex parts. And so I had enough to get started on the first. And so I've tended to be the one to not wait until you're ready. You just jump in and start.
Yeah.
And so that's how that tank got started, and this tank is following.
So you kind of had the two tanks together from the get-go almost.
They were being put together parallel,
Huh.
yeah, with the parts for this tank in advance of the parts of this tank.
Okay. So I would imagine over that period of building, there have been a lot of lessons learned from the other tank.
Yes.
And you guys are going to follow through on this one.
Yep. We're moving faster on this one because of our knowledge on that one.
A great shot of the inside of a Panzer hull and kind of the early beginnings of a restoration. And talk about the jig, like why, to those that are new to this stuff, why is the jig necessary? Why can't you just start welding?
Well, of course, in order to make a tank that's going to, start and actually finish up as a cohesive unit, it needs to conform to the correct dimensions, and it needs to be straight and square. So the best way I could figure is to build a jig or a cradle that we could assemble the pieces into that is the correct width. It's exactly level. It's, the sides run plumb. So it gives us a good fixture that we can start putting things to. And then at some point it becomes its own thing. And then this would be the third hull that's come out of this. I built one for a friend that is building a tank. We built it out of new steel. And so the hull goes together and then it sets on pipes and it rolls out this end. And we call this the berthing table, the Panzer IV berthing table.
And this thing looks like it's been cut into several pieces and re-welded.
Yeah, so you mentioned the 80%. So this tank was a complete side, rear. It had a nose. This side, there was a piece of it, but it was missing some chunks out of it. So that's part of the sourcing thing, is we had to come up with the slab pieces and the correct slab pieces. So when they're put together, then everything is accounted for. Okay. So most of these pieces were horrifically bent. A lot of them were super bent. And we had to make a press that was capable of taking 100 tons. And so I got 100-ton cylinders, and we started pressing these things out straight. And once we got them all ironed out straight, these got stored away, and we started to work on the first Panzer. And these have just been sitting, waiting. My knowledge is specific to like the H's and the J's in this area that I'm doing the work in. Mm-hmm. I have a pretty good understanding of all the Panzer IVs.
Right.
I do draw on great resources. There's other people out there in the world that are super expert. There's always somebody that has that little bit of information, like what went here, what is that bolt hole for?
Right.
And somebody out there will have that bit of information. So. Mm-hmm. It's an ongoing deal. I feel totally comfortable with these models.
Right, and that brings up a good point, and kind of like a separation of you got the engineers and the guys who've designed it, and the guys who work in the factories and put them together, and then you've got the operators who use these things in the war and so on. But restoring a tank is a different ballgame to building a tank in a factory and designing it, because you're dealing with a myriad of other skill sets that they're not necessarily using when something is brand new. So the skills involved in re-straightening out like blown up metal, stuck, seized, rusted, things of that nature really come into their own in a restoration as opposed to a build, quote unquote. So this is a really good opportunity to go back to the kind of the drawing board, more or less, with how Panzers are built. And we have an amazing shot of the suspension there that's not hidden away by the track and the road wheels. And you can kind of go through how that works. Like, it's almost like half a leaf spring compared to your normal.
I call it a quarter elliptical spring is the term for it. Quarter elliptical. So Panzer IV seems to be a blend between custom fitting, one-off type production, and standardized parts. So this cast piece, it would be a standardized part, right? So it's going to come out of a mold, and all of those bolts are going to have exactly the same spot. The assembly plant is going to make a hull, and they're going to make it a width and a length and whatnot. We found that when we're studying like what is the exact dimensions of a Panzer IV, even in just the H and the J model, that the distance between the bogey setups will vary tank to tank. So I've seen some photographs where like the hulls would be assembled and turned upside down, and one machine would come down and punch all of the holes in the bottom. So you would punch holes in the side, punch holes in the bottom, and then bolt your piece up. So apparently, when they were laying out the holes upside down, and these are supposed to be, I think, one meter apart, but they vary. So it's like a guy makes a mark, he measures over, makes a mark. They bring in the machine, they set it down, but it's not. It's super precise. It's not done on a jig. So there's precision and there's not precision in the Panzer IV.
So we were having that discussion on the last episode about how Panzers kind of bolted together, but I can see definitely they went to some effort of making like a type of join for, tell me what's going on here.
Yeah, as the war progressed and they kept upgrading these hulls, they learned that lacing armor together makes a stronger joint. So the H model, this one down here, has a different arrangement on the end. It doesn't have these laced features. So it also doesn't have these tow hooks. These are symbolic of the later production. This has 3 return rollers. That tank has 4 return rollers. So just little minor differences like that will tell you where it came from. This was made late enough that it was made by Nywerk. So this would have been made in Austria. And it would have come out with a factory painted camel scheme on it. So
wow, so this is like late war.
Late war, yeah.
Like into 45 still?
Into 45 for sure.
Really?
For sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Living in America, you don't have quite the access to these parts that some do in other parts of the world. So I got to take what I get.
Right.
So the pieces that I had were all primarily, most everything was bent one way or another. We found that there was a lot of differences in the armor pieces. And there's been some discussion about why that is. Some of the armor will bend, and it'll go ahead and you can press it out and it'll take its shape and remain flat. Some of the armor won't. It's very brittle and it'll break. Some people have speculated that the armor was all the same, but maybe that tank burned and the heat treated and it made it brittle, and so now I'm trying to press brittle steel. But like this section here, flat would not bend. We just could not get it flat.
Now, so was this bowed inwards or outwards?
Yeah, so this was a blast, right? So there was a blast, and so it had a bubble. And pressing out a bubble is really hard. So at some point, after you've tried everything you can, then you have to start cutting reliefs into it so to allow that metal to move, and then press it flat and weld it up, and then it'll retain its flat shape. And so we'll go ahead and we'll finish this out so it looks fine.
So they're like relief cuts in order to flatten it out?
Yeah. This is work that took place about 4 years ago. Yeah.
And real quick on our hull welding technique, are you guys arc welding this?
We're stick welding with stainless. So yeah, that's really the only welding method. We're preheating and post heating and welding with stainless, and that's the only thing that will work.
And then I found on some of the American World War II stuff, the real high nickel content weld beads, you got to heat them up and try to cut them with a torch, and you can get them to glow red, but you can't cut them. Have you found anything like that on the German armor?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, so I got to remember which way it is. Yeah, they won't cut with a torch, but they'll cut like crazy with a plasma cutter.
Right, yeah, that's what we found the same thing, yep.
So yeah, when we're taking stuff apart, if it's armor and it's the nickel rod that they put it together with, you have to use a plasma.
And let's talk about armor briefly. We had that discussion earlier about somebody was saying that it might be face hardened or it might be rolled homogeneous. Do you have a better indicator of that based on what you've...
Yeah, I couldn't argue the point. I think this is homogeneous armor, so I think it's armor through and through. It's not just face hardened.
Okay.
This is the crazy part of Panzer IV. In the earlier video, I talked about how this is a 1930s design, so it goes all the way back to when they were figuring out what a tank looked like and how to go together. So they chose to put the fuel tanks outside of the fighting compartment. So
where are we? Is this the firewall? Right
yeah,
there?
that's the firewall.
And the crew commander is kind of right here.
Correct. So this is the engine compartment. The engine is setting right here.
Right.
Everything in the Panzer IV, nothing is symmetrical. Everything is asymmetrical. You can see it's running. The drive shaft is running off to one side.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that the slip ring, the electric slip ring, where the turret rotates, is offset to the left side. So on a Panzer IV, the turret is setting off to the left.
Jeez.
Yeah. So
that's the center of the turret.
Yes.
The turret's
correct, and this is the center of the drivetrain. So instead of
that brings up an interesting point: tank height profile. If you were to overcome that by centering both the driveline and the turret ring in the center of the tank, the only option is to increase the height of the turret, thus increasing the height of the tank.
Right.
So even though they were kind of playing around and they weren't quite sure yet. In my mind, by offsetting the drive shaft and the slip ring, they have allowed a lower profile.
They're trying to get the profile low. Yep.
Yeah.
Tall tank, bigger target.
So they're not necessarily dummies. Like there's a method to the madness.
Right.
Like, yeah.
And the fact that the fuel tanks are underneath the tank, so the underneath floor from that section right there is open. So the fuel tanks go in up underneath. Under this turret, yeah.
Really?
So you're looking at that as the floor of the tank that you're touching there. It's just an elevated floor.
And then you have the access panels underneath.
And the access panels underneath, which created, in my mind, a huge weak spot where these plates go together. There's a place they bolt together, and it's maybe 3/16 steel that is the floor of the tank.
Yeah.
And that is all the strength.
Yeah.
So in my view, it would be incredibly weak underneath in this whole center part. Panzer IV is the only one I'm aware of like this. Every other tank, they put the fuel tanks inside of the hull.
Yeah.
And I get the idea. It's like when 1934 or whatever, when they're penciling this thing out, they're going, well, we don't want the fuel tanks inside with the guys. Let's put them outside. We'll put them up underneath. That's a good idea, but there's a lot of bad that comes with it.
Right.
One big problem is it eliminates using torsion bars in this. So torsion bars also would increase the height. So you've got the engine setting as low as possible. You have the whole drivetrain as low as possible. You got the fuel tanks in there. So there's no room to run torsion bars through here. To put torsion bars in this tank would be a redesign completely.
Yeah. And then I see during the restoration, you guys have had to cut bigger holes. Were they seized up bolts or?
No, these were the misalignment that I'm talking about. So this particular piece right here came from another tank.
Yeah.
So it doesn't line up with the holes that are in the floor because the floor belongs to this piece.
Okay.
So I can put this bogey on, the holes all lined up because they came together.
Yeah.
When this piece goes on and it's all lined up where it needs to sit, the holes are misaligned. And it comes to that lack of precision in where the bogey stations are mounted.
Yeah, so that kind of busts that whole myth of the Germans being super precise. That's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, well, keep in mind that, again, 1930s. So this is designed before tanks were tanks.
Right.
And so it carried forward throughout the war because it did work. And the technology on this particular tank is so low that you can build them in a shop like this, right? You couldn't build a Panther or a Tiger in a shop like this.
Okay.
They're highly precision. Every piece in them is very precise.
Right.
Superior tanks.
Okay.
Awesome tanks.
Yeah.
Panzer IV is the workhorse, and you could put them together easily.
Right. How much of this tank did you guys have to restore versus remanufacture? And how challenging is it to remanufacture stuff?
So the original parts are obvious because you can see the rust pitting, right? So Schertzen is all original in this. Most of the gun carriage, the face, but probably more than half of the turret is original. As we move down into the hull, it's less and less original parts, so it's new steel.
Okay.
So this particular tank lives in a gray zone between restoration and recreation,
right?
More or less.
Yeah. And then, but it looks like you guys have done some incredible work to make this what it is. And then we were watching something the other day, and you were pointing out the originality of the true German pattern metal plate. Is that what we got going on here, or?
Yeah, so this metal plate is new made metal plate,
okay.
But it's a very specific pattern. I don't know if you can see the little cross hatching. That was very unique to Panzer IV. I don't understand why, but like Panzer III has certain traction plate, and Tigers will use different stuff. There's the modern with the little diamond shape and whatnot, but this is Panzer IV. So it's available by reproduction, and most original is gone. It's just completely rusted away.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, you guys have gone to that level of even getting the pattern right on the pattern plate.
Yeah. On this particular tank, anything that's cast is original, because I don't have the ability or the budget to go out and create molds and casting and stuff. It's better to find the old and buy it. So this has original final drives, original drive sprockets, the return rollers. Like I said, a good portion of the turret. Some chunks of the hull and Aufbau are original. All of the idler mechanisms and the idler wheels and things like that are original. One thing about mixing original plate with new is that you have to be very precise on the accuracy of your dimensions, because if you're putting together a puzzle and you're missing one piece, that piece has to be shaped just right or it doesn't fit in the puzzle.
Okay.
And we found that over and over as we're moving through this and working our way through. If we ever got off on dimensions, all of a sudden nothing works. Everything's bumping into everything else. So we'd have to go back to the drawing board, figure out where our dimensions are off, and then correct that. And so that by the time you start at the bottom, you end up at the top, everything fits.
Okay. So we talked about repowering it, and whilst it's not original, I definitely appreciate the thought and the ingenuity that goes into how do we repower something, but keep it in the confines and the parameters of the original vehicle. And I think you guys have done a fantastic job. So what is this, and what challenges did you guys have getting this thing in here?
So I mentioned in earlier that this is a GMC V12. It's 702 cubic inches and roughly has the same bore and stroke and everything as the original Maybach. So the idea is it's a good swap because it has the right sound. It's a gasoline motor. It's going to power roughly the same, and so it's a super good substitute for the Maybach. Little problem we struggled with and still struggle with is this is quite a bit longer engine than the Maybach, so we've had to make quite a bit of modification to get this long engine to fit down into this box.
So how many times did you install and pull out the engine in the rack?
So yeah, back in the day when it was just a hull sitting in the rack over there, the engine goes in, then the engine comes out, and the engine goes in, and you make a bracket, and then the engine goes out, and then you try to figure out where you're going to fit different pieces, and it's just a back and forth process.
So all these little strikes you see here on the back deck, is that one of the mechanics? Like every time they put the engine in, they're like,
yeah, smack it good. No, when they produce armor, the best explanation that I've had is that there was a hand-operated hydraulic press. So when the armor rolls out and it's rolled and buckled a little bit, that they would fine-tune the straightness of the armor by using this hydraulic press. And you'll notice on a lot of armor vehicles, even some modern stuff, you'll see these marks all over, and that's in the armor production phase.
And you guys recreated that?
Yep. And the pieces that we used that were not, we wanted to match as much as possible with texture, and so we put a little marks in.
And just a grinder and a cutting wheel?
No, actually we used a kind of a purpose-built tool that would hammer them in. So we actually did hammer those in.
Cool.
This is a mild number. If you look at World War II German armor, there's plates that are completely covered with those things. I mean, there might be 1,000 of those things like in that door panel.
Really?
I mean, there's like every direction, and so they were really having to put a lot of work into making the armor suitable. Throughout
the process of restoring something to this level, What are some of the horror stories, the moments that the morale hit rock bottom and you guys thought it might have been all over? If you can share some of those points.
So early on, the drivetrain, fitting the longer V12 end of the thing, you started having to make certain adjustments, certain modifications, and one modification leads to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And so at points when we were doing the drivetrain, there seemed to be times when it's like, oh, this is never going to work. When I'm trying to fashion the clutch where it actually works out by the transmission and all this stuff. So we had some serious head scratching on that. It works well.
Yeah.
So I guess in the end we're victorious. Probably the biggest disappointment, I guess, at this point in time. So there's never a start and an end of a project. It's always an ongoing thing, right? So we'll continually improve this. On the interior, when we were in there, there's just several points here and here and here. Have things in process, they're not installed yet.
Yeah.
The biggest disappointment was we were close enough to finishing this that we could see the end. The end is right there. And when we go to put in the gearboxes for the turret and the gun elevation, they collide.
Oh.
And it causes a whole myriad of problems.
Yeah.
So to basically come to the point where it's like, oh, okay, we're going to go ahead and finish it like this, and we're going to leave it until we get the gun elevation thing worked out. Then we'll come back in and straighten that out. But to come so far to get right to the end and then have to make like this major compromise. So
well, I guess like the real thing, you guys are doing the upgrades, the finding the problems, and then how do we get past it?
We're going to be an Ausführlich by the time we're done.
And then the rewarding moments. What were some parts where it was like a milestone and morale was kind of high and everyone was excited?
So there's a lot of little milestones along the way, and I touched on it earlier when it goes to bringing everything together and you start putting the major components together, and you always wondered why there was a notch in this particular piece, but when you start putting it all together, you can say, oh, that's why there's a notch, because this piece needs that space.
Yeah.
So it was super gratifying to see the thing come together and the pieces all mesh to make an overall tank. A lot of it was done in components, and we were just following as close to correct as we could, and then to have things mesh. You pointed out the turret door as it opens, and it swings through these little cutouts in the shirts, and who would know why those are there until you assemble it all and you open the door, and it fits through. It's like, oh, I see why this is shaped this way. And so those little thrills were kind of throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
The biggest rush on the thing is basically just the exterior appearance.
Yeah.
I mean, it never fails that when I walk into the shop here and I look at it, it's just like almost, 8 week. It's just the outside looks is such a success.
So that would lead me to the next question. Your favorite part of a restoration is the paint job and the markings?
Yeah, we call it putting the decals on.
Yep, yep.
So that's the last thing we did before we pulled out and took first pictures is we put the decals on, and the finishing camo scheme. I'm really pleased with the way our camo scheme worked out. It doesn't look...
It looks great.
Contrived. It looks natural.
And what's the part of a restoration you just dread? Like if you...
Oh, you could speak to the guys. It's the grinding and the hours and hours and hours of fabricating, the pieces that we had to make for it.
And then you've got to fabricate a track pin in the first one. It's like, cool, I got it to work now. Now I need to make 97 of them.
Yeah, I have 225 of them.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any final notes that you would like to say about this project?
Just that hopefully, this thing survives time, and long after I'm gone and the rest of the team, they finish their lives and then their grandkids' lives, that hopefully this is still in existence somewhere.
I have no doubt. Like the rarity of it, it's not.
It's destined for a museum, most likely.
Yeah.
Sometime, somewhere. So for right now, we're basking in the glory of kind of having it behind us. We're working on other projects. And
in closing, what would you say to someone that wants to get into building tanks and tank restoration? Like how would someone completely new to the field get a start in doing such a cool job?
Well, I would say that you shouldn't even look unless you have a deep passion for it, because it is not easy at all.
Yeah.
It is grueling. It's hard work. You bang your head, your elbows and stuff. I smashed my finger today. It's endless. So you have to have a burning passion.
Yeah.
There's tourists and there's tank builders and restorers, right?
Right.
A lot of tourists,
Yeah.
and I appreciate those people, but I thrive off them. I love people that love tanks.
Yeah.
But for the people that are working on them, you're gonna pay a price. And so what you would have to do is seek out someone that has vehicles for the hard job of restoring or building, and then be genuine and jump in and get dirty.
Yeah. So you have to be. There's a lot of people that they want the tank rides and they want the photos, but of all those people, how many of them are willing to come up and say to you, like, what do I have to do to be part of this? So you have to be willing to give something back in order to achieve this. And I will say, every month you work on a tank, your body ages like 6 years, right? So what age would that put you at roughly?
500.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm at least 98.
Yeah.
Like, these knees, and yeah, okay. Well, anything else you want to add to?
Yeah. If you're interested in getting involved, I would suggest finding the closest museum that is out there that has something that can restore, and just make yourself available.
Yeah.
It may be paid, it may not be paid. There's a lot of this stuff is done by volunteers.
Yeah.
I need to give a shout out to my volunteers that come over from Denver.
Wow.
I've got guys that drive over here. We put in long weekends, probably once every 5-6 weeks. There's a handful of guys that over the years, they've been doing this for years. They're excellent workers. They know tanks. They know how to work. They know how to fabricate, clean, sandblast, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so they've been doing this for years, and this is what they do for pleasure. So if you're one of those guys, find a project somewhere and jump in.
To that end, where can people find out more about PanzerFabrik?
So we have a website. I would like to say it stays updated better than it actually is. We're on Facebook under PanzerFabrik.
Okay.
We have a www.panzerfabrik.net.
Okay.
And you see the other tanks and some of the fun stuff we get involved with.
We'll put that there somewhere.
Somebody's holding on to .com and they won't give it up. So.
All right.
I've
Well,
tried to buy it.
lastly, once again, thank you for your time and for your team. And again, a fantastic piece of work. Yeah, I'm lost for words of the quality you guys have put into this. Very well done.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys, that is pretty much a wrap of Panzer IV in depth. And again, I am thoroughly impressed with the quality and how this turned out. Like a really, really, really cool piece of history. And yeah, do you have anything you would say in conclusion of Panzer IV in general, like a wrap on that?
No, I say a lot of negative things about it. Like I pointed to all of the weakness, but but I love the vehicle. Obviously I do, or I wouldn't have taken the 3 years it took to put this thing together and the 7 years before that to round up parts. So I think it's an awesome vehicle. I've always liked it my whole life. It's iconic. It's a success beyond my wildest dreams, so it's all good.
I'm gonna jump down off this thing. And I want to thank you for spending the time to bring this thing out. And I'm glad that we can showcase this thing. But real quick, talk about in not World War II, I mean now in the tank community now, the rarity of this vehicle. Like it seems like it's a gem, like really.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. All of the German armor is super rare.
Right.
So you'll only see it in government-owned and controlled museums.
Okay.
There's some in private hands, but not a lot. And it's hard to come across German armor. And it was a lifelong goal to have a piece of German armor. And so
yeah, and you did it. And it's fully functional. Like we've been driving it. And we can, a lot of museums, it's behind barriers and behind fences and no go, and rightly so, but to be able to hands-on touch it, how does it work, pull and push levers and drive it, again, I can't thank you enough. Well, and go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk endlessly about all the detail stuff. So
yeah, I feel lucky that we were the first ones to bring this out, and I appreciate you guys doing that. And then these guys right over here, We've got Michael and Eddie. Wait for the camera, guys. This is part of Randy's team, and they've come in on their day off to film for us today, but these guys were part of the restoration too, right?
Yep, they were in from the get-go, so they've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours grinding and cutting and fitting and processing all of these little minute parts. So, I mean, they're amazing fabricators and amazing craftsmen. I can't say enough. We're missing one right now. Well, I assume we're going to pick him up maybe in post. His name's John.
We'll CGI him.
Yeah,
I think we have the budget.
Some kind of muscular guy.
But yeah, so like they say, you'd be nothing without your team, and yeah.
I also want to mention Kevin.
Okay.
Kevin's our machinist. He volunteer came in and spent hundreds of hours machining all of the crazy little fasteners that we have, all the pointy parts and whatnot. So
we're going to have a closer look at all of that skill in the next restoration video. So once again, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, cut.